Batista here, and welcome to a start of a new draft league. This league we're playing in is the Pokemon Draft Premier League. This is an invitational league, so I had to be personally invited by the creator, Dan from Stout Gaming's. I've played against him a couple of times, and most recently I played against his crew in the finals of the VDL crew. And Dan is a very good coach, and this league historically has been very good with many really skilled coaches. And so I'm excited to have been invited, and I'm excited to see how this is going to turn out. With this league, as per pretty much every league, I wanted to have some sort of theme with my draft, and I also did not prep nearly as much for the draft, so I didn't have as much going in. Initially going in, I was interested in maybe doing a mono type team. Some of the types that I was somewhat interested in were like Terra Electric, because there's a lot of Paradox Mon that like the electric terrain. Do something with like Pincurchin, maybe Iron Hands or Raging Bolt, stuff like that with the Terra Electric team. I considered water with like Politoed and some rain stuff. I also consider like fire with just the sun core, but honestly I didn't really prep enough ahead of time to effectively really do these, and in addition to that, some of these are going to be pretty tricky to do with the point system in this, and so I ended up kind of giving up on the monotype team pretty early on, and so I decided I wanted to go in a different direction. Had no idea what direction I wanted to do, and like I said, by the time I really thought about this, the draft had already started. And so I felt pressured to make a pick. And so I decided to go to think about Pokemon that I wanted to try out, and which Pokemon, new interesting Pokemon I haven't really used. And the Pokemon that came to mind is Ogerpon. Ogerpon is incredibly powerful. New Pokemon I haven't tried at all in the slightest. And they have 4 different variants, and I was the 3rd overall pick, and so that means no matter what, I was guaranteed to get one of these forms. And so I'd say generically the type of style that I most prevalently play probably would put the Water Ogerpon as the one that fit my playstyle the best, since it has the ability to be really offensive or defensive, has a really good defensive typing. And then when it terrorizes, it gets a special defense boost, making it harder to kill. And so definitely probably would match my playstyle a little bit better than any of the other options. However, Water Ogerpon was picked, I think, 2nd overall, and so I didn't have it as an option. And so with the 3 remaining, the most powerful one generically is probably the fire one, because fire Grass is a really good typing. The Mold Breaker is really relevant ability at being able to hit Levitate Mons with its ground moves, Flash Fire Mons with fire moves, Sap Sipper Mons with grass moves, and then also when it tears, it gets an attack boost plus the Terra for stab fire moves as well. So does massive damage, especially with the fire coverage. However, I'm not sure if this particularly fit my space style, but because I think it was better than the other ones by enough margin, I decided to get the Fire Ogerpon. However, at this point, I still very much want to do some sort of theme rather than just pick random Pokemon or optimal Pokemon. And so I now had to do the retroactive decision of figuring out what theme I want to do with the Pokemon I've already selected. And so there's a couple thoughts here or there. Like I said, I checked maybe Mono Fire, Mono Grass. Neither of them particularly seemed great. And after a little bit of thinking, I came up with a strategy that I thought was quite viable, gave me a reasonable amount of options, and was on theme. And that is mono Pokemon with a single ability. And so Ogerpon's only ability is Mold Breaker. Technically can tear out of it, but I'm just going to say it's base form in this case. Because there's a lot of really powerful Pokemon with only a single ability. For example, we have the Swords of Justice that all have Justified. We have the Paradox Mon that have all the same ability, more or less. We have, the Galarian Birds. We have the Treasure of Ruin. And a lot of other really powerful Mons on the upper end, such as Urshifu. However, we also got a lot of lower tier Pokemon as well, such as a bunch of different Levitate mons, because Levitate is a really common ability, and a lot of Pokemon that have Levitate have it as its only ability. In addition, we have a couple of interesting Pokemon that have unique abilities. For example, we have the Cramorant, we have the Oricorio, we have like the Minior, we have Pokemon like that whose ability is really unique, and so you can have some interesting Pokemon in that aspect. And so specifically, this is technically the entire list. So if you want to pause and see all of the viable Pokemon, these are the list of all the viable Pokemon, so sorted from left to right by the highest and lowest tier. However, like I said, I thought there was enough interesting Pokemon and enough viable Pokemon to make a reasonable team with this, and that was the theme I decided to go with. And so now I have my first Pokemon, which is Ogerpon Fire, and I have my theme. Now I need to figure out what to go with this Pokemon. So the next Pokemon I wanted to go with Ogerpon is I wanted a good special attacker, because Ogerpon's a really good physical attacker, and I don't have any way to really mitigate like intimidates or things like that. So I wanted something that could actually be very good special damage. And in addition to that, I was interested in a mon that didn't share many or any really weaknesses with the Ogerpon. And so I decided to go with Hydreigon. So Hydreigon, generally really good special attack. Its fairy weakness can be mitigated some amount by Ogerpon, especially because Ogerpon can use Follow Me. The Tailwind can help deal with or make my team a little bit faster. And then overall, I think Hydreigon is just generically a very powerful Pokemon. I considered a couple other Pokemon, namely the Latios line and Moltres Galar. Those are kind of the two that I think were somewhat interesting as alternatives. However, I decided I didn't really want Moltres because I didn't like having the rock weakness of my special attacker, because Ogerpon is also weak to rock. And I also didn't like the ability that I couldn't Follow Me with the Ogerpon if they use something like Rock Slides, which could hit both of the Pokemon, especially since Ogerpon cannot tear out of that rock weakness at all. And then the Latios line, I think both could be very powerful. However, based on kind of later tier Pokemon, I felt like I was going to be able to get a very solid Psychic Mon in some of the lower tiers, and didn't have as much value of that, but I felt like Dark Mons were a little bit harder to come by with my specific restriction. And with that, I decided to go with Hydreigon. Also, Hydreigon just has the best stat total and has just really good move pool. So next up, I decided I wanted to get my Watermon. I technically have a fire grass mon, so I want to get a fire water grass core, and so I decided to go with Rotom. So I went for Rotom for basically one big reason, which is I wanted a good water type, and of the good like higher tier water types with my restriction, there were pretty much only 4 options, and the other 3 were Palafin, Iron Bundle, and Walking Wake. And though those are not bad, there's some interesting aspects of them. Iron Bundle would be my fastest mon. Walking Wake just has a pretty good typing overall. Palafin, is a really incredibly powerful mon. The downside of Palafin doesn't really, my team's not super pivot focused. Iron Bundle, rock type. Walking Weight is another dragon type, and there's a chance I might get another dragon after this in addition to that. And then the other issue on top of all of that is that these 3, the only other 3 water types that I think I would consider good water types that I was able to draft at this point, were all S tier Pokemon, or the highest tier Pokemon. And Rotom is 1 tier lower than that, and I thought that it was really solid at doing that. In addition to that, it has no shared weaknesses of the other Pokemon. Actually, its weakness is resisted by the other 2 Pokemon, and so I thought it was a really good pickup at this point. So next up, I decided to go with Mimikyu. So Mimikyu, the reason why I got it is kind of the situation similar to the water type, is that there were actually exactly 2 other fairy types that I could have drafted at this point, which is Screamtail and Enamorous Therian. So I could see an argument that maybe Screamtail would have been better than Mimikyu. honestly, because I already have some good damage output and speed control support mon could be really relevant. However, I've literally just drafted Screamtail in my most recent league I completed, and so I wanted to kind of mix it up a little bit. And then Anonymous Therian, honestly, is pretty bad on my team as of now. It's like obviously with Mimikyu, I do have Trick Room, but before that point, my team was really fast, didn't really have Trick Room, and is more focused on some like support and fast damage rather than kind of a setup sweeper and Trick Room on like that. And so, with in addition to being a Pheromoon, which is something I wanted, Mimikyu can set up Will-O-Wisp, can set up Trick Room or undo Trick Room. Both of these can be relevant since my team is fairly fast at the moment. However, I'm not really top tier speed at the moment. I'm like mid fast rather than just fast. In addition, I think Mimikyu's ability makes it incredibly useful at being able to take hit no matter what. And so yeah, overall, just like Mimikyu, I think is a reasonable include on this. And also just like with Ogerpon, I think having mons that can do well with like swords dancing or just generically offensive leaning mons can be pretty good. And this is definitely one of the reasons why this might be better than Screamtail in the aspect. But like I said, not completely convinced, but definitely I think a good option. And like I said, I really wanted a fairy type. So next up, I wanted to continue on with the trend of getting a mon in a type that I don't have many options of, in which I wanted to get a steel type. So in this situation, I think this was actually exclusively 2 steel types that were available at this time. I think there might have been a highest tier steel mon, but I think these might have been the actual only 2 options I had that had a single type. So we have Cobalion and Iron Treads. This was probably the hardest debate I had on my higher tier Pokemon, and I spent a lot of time thinking between the 2 of them, because the real issue with them is that they're almost identical. They have, I think, within 2 stat points of the same speed. They have incredibly similar bulk. The Iron Treads has a little bit more attack, but Cobalion has a little bit higher based stab move in close combat. In like Sacred Sword, and I have Boost Energy, which to boost the Iron Treads, which can be really good. However, Cobalion has a little bit better support move pool and like coaching, and has a little bit better setup move pool, and so it was definitely a really tough debate, and I decided eventually to go with Cobalion. So I went for Cobalion for 3 main reasons. The first one is I really liked its setup potential. Specifically, it gets moves like Sword Stance, it gets Calm Mind, and Workup as ways to boost itself. One of the downsides I've had with Iron Treads in the past, and similarly I imagine with Cobalion, is that damage output is a little bit lacking, and the ability to set up damage yourself is a big deal. And in addition, coaching onto my Ogerpon seems like a really powerful thing to do. So that's one reason. The other reason is that I was planning with my next pick to get another Paradoxmon, and so it means that I don't have to deal with fighting between boost energy between 2 mons. And then third of all, I had my eye on another ground type that was pretty powerful. However, there were no other steel types that were in the lower tiers that I was particularly interested in. Yeah, so the only other fighting mon that I really would have considered, other than the Cobalion, because of like my points at this point, in which I've drafted a lot of top tier Pokemon, would have been Kubfu, which is a not fully evolved Pokemon that's honestly not particularly good. Its main strength is that it gets inner focus, and you can hold an Eviolite and be okay bulk. But like I said, I had a ground type. I liked its support move pool, and I was planning on getting another Paradoxmon, in which that is Iron Thorns. So I got Iron Thorns as my next pick. The main reason is I was somewhat interested in the Rockmon, but also I wanted a mon. In this case, this is the 40-point tier, so somewhat lower tier. And I thought that there were 2 good value mons in that tier, both of them being rock types, and Iron Thorns and Lycanroc Dusk form, and I was very much interested in one of them because I thought they were by far the best value in that tier for me. Because everything else in that tier is honestly not particularly good with my restriction. Um, I think Lycanroc might have been better. I'm not gonna lie. Lycanroc has 110 base speed, about the same attack once you account for like Tough Claws. Boost has good priority move and just overall is pretty powerful. However, I decided to go with Iron Thorns mainly because I thought Iron Thorns was fun. I haven't tried it yet. We had multiple debates in chats about Iron Thorns being not good at all. I think that I'm interested in testing it out, see how it goes. First of all, I'm going to theoretically likely have a lot of Levitate mons, so I have a lot of switch outs for its ground weakness, which is good in the fact that it mitigates that. Other than that, I also will not have any booster or Pokemon that use booster energy other than this, so that is a free item I can always use on it. And overall, just I think it's a good bulky mon with some setup potential in which I can use Follow Me of Ogerpon to set up if I want to. So next up is the ground type that I was interested in, and this was in the 25-point tier, and this was I think the best value in that tier by a large margin. In Flygon, so Flygon, I think is not the best mon in the abstract sense, but for its points, it's very powerful. It's 100 base speed, 100 base attack. It gets setup move and Dragon Dance. It has, the ability to be special if you wanted to. It has like first impression, so for some priority, and in addition, like being able to have a mon that resists the rock coverage is nice, and I think just having a ground type in general, I think is a very powerful thing to do. And like I said, because I didn't get the iron treads, I really wanted a ground type, and Flygon was the best value. The only other ground type I possibly would have gotten if I didn't get Flygon would have been actually Vibratava, Flygon's middle evolution, which is a lot worse. Other than that, most of the ground types were either too high value at this point for me, or were not fully evolved Pokemon that were not particularly impressive. And so that is the main reason I ended up going for Flygon. And so at this point, I felt like I kind of had my base core done. This is kind of the core of my team, and the rest of it is just kind of a couple lower tier Pokemons kind of filling out the rest of it. And so I didn't really know how I was gonna finish it off, and I needed to get a Pokemon from the lowest tier, so a 5-point Pokemon, and I just wanted to pick that one, which is Electrike. This was what I considered the best value for the 5-tier Pokemon. Electrike with an Eviolite is pretty bulky. It doesn't have the greatest move pool. That's kind of its big weakness, but it has like 80 base attack and reasonably bulky, 0 weaknesses, and it has an okay move pool, but not great. And so not much about it other than it's a 5-point Pokemon I could imagine theoretically using. And so at this point though, I'm kind of in a position of I don't know what I want to do. I have a couple more points to get a relatively reasonable Pokemon. Currently, I feel like my team lacks a little bit on bulky physical flying or physical fighting mons. And so I did want to kind of think of a way to deal with that. And so the first ones that came to mind was a flying type. And so I considered Oricorio or Cramorant as a way to deal with some of these bulky flying type. However, the issue with this is Oricorio, in this case Fire Oricorio, has a 4 times weakness to rock. A lot of fighting mons have rock coverage. And Cramorant has incredibly low physical defense, and on addition to that, a lot of fighting mons get a Thunder Punch. And in addition to that, on top of all those things, is both of these Pokemon don't have a great special attack to hit physically bulky fighting mons as well. However, I'm this is kind of the best thing. And with a little bit of help from Otto discussing some options, I actually found that one that I felt was a little bit better in Alolan Raichu. So Alolan Raichu, though I don't think its ability is particularly relevant to me that much, I might set up Electric Train. We'll see, maybe at some point this season. But for the most part, the strength of it is it gives good, consistent psychic stab. It has fake out, which is something that I definitely would like to have and was missing at this point. And in addition to that, though, I already have two other or three other electric types. I do not have a ground weakness because I have 4 ground immunities at this point. And so its ground weakness is actually not that big of a deal. And so the main idea of this is it's a very fast mon that has psychic coverage and can fake out some of these mons and deal with some of the fighting mons, which, like I said, that was kind of my concern, mainly physically bulky fighting mons. And so at this point, my draft was basically over. I only had 5 points left, and so I just kind of threw on my last mon, which in this case was Clauncher. Um, yeah, there weren't any really other options. There's not much else. Like I think having another water type is somewhat nice. Just generically, the water is one of the best defensive typings. And so with that, this is my final team, the final distribution of it. So if we're looking at the team, a little bit more in detail, I will say my speed tiering is not the best. I have a bunch of mons in the same speed tier and then big jumps of differences, so it's really easy to speed tier or creep with it. My my type tier is not the best. I have a fairly notable Ghost Fairy and fighting weakness. Obviously I have some mons that resist all of them, so they're not completely bad. Specifically, and on top of that, the fairy weakness is not as bad because I do have Follow Me of a mon that resists fairy. However, I did not like my type chart that well. However, I think overall I have answers to most things. I have good offensive threats on the physical side and the special side, and I have some reasonably bulky mons on top of some speed control with like Electro Web from Rotom. We have Tailwind from Flygon and Hydreigon. We have Trick Room from Mimikyu. And then in theory, we have reasonable amount of setup moves and some like Swords Dance, Dragon Dances on top of that. And so with that, we'll see how this season goes, but that's my team. I hope you enjoyed the the walkthrough. Thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all for week 1.